Halfway through the 2024 high school football season, coming to you on Knuckleball Prime Time live from the barn. We bring you this high school football midseason roundtable. I'm Greg Allen, joined alongside a lot of the guys that are bringing you coverage this season on the Parkland Sports Live in conjunction with the Parkland Podcast. Chad Speakar in-house, as well as Jake Whitener, who's been on color, and a little inside joke to start. The nicest looking of the quartet. Mike Reeves alongside, and got Chad Winch, our producer and engineer. Good to have everybody alongside as we bring you week-to-week coverage of high school football, getting ready for Potosi and Central this week in Week 6. Guys, we'll just kind of talk about the first half of the season, kind of recap what's been going down, what you've liked, what you haven't liked, and then we'll kind of segue into the back half of the high school football season. But great to sit alongside with everybody. This is kind of a neat setup. I like this. This is awesome.
This is your first time to the barn, Greg?
It is my first time to the barn. It's kind of cool. I know. Cool. I've seen you talk to a couple of players this season from the barn, Chad, and this is a lot bigger than it plays in the videos that you see when you're the viewer. I'll tell you that.
It's just always good to get a new outlook and perspective on things, put a bunch of people in the same room, talk about the same topics, and see how many different opinions there are or how many are the same. I think that's always fun to do.
Jake, you been here before?
Yeah, we did Fredericktown interview last week. So that was my, besides the introductory into the barn this year, with the opportunity to be around you guys. So third time in.
Well, 5 weeks into the high school football season, I know it's been a lot of fun for me personally, and it's been neat hanging out with you guys and doing different stuff. I know, Chad, we had you down in Jackson on the sideline, got a chance to work with you this season, and I think coming up on Friday as we get you pregame coverage, you might be watching this for Week 6 pregame coverage. It's Potosi and Central. I think you've got that one, Chad, and I'll be behind the mic for 7 and 8. And then back to Chad Speakar for Week 9 with Farmington Central. But let's talk about the three kind of main coverage teams that we've seen most throughout the season in the broadcast games. And we'll start with the one we got coming up on Friday in the 4-1 Central Rebels and Corey Schweiss's group. They're the kings of the overtime, right? A double overtime win, a triple overtime win. I know I watched that game, Chad, that you called that slop thing down in Fredericktown. That was a mess, but Central got away by the skin of their teeth.
We had a lot of, most of us had fun. One of us got rained on, but that's as good a game and as fun a game, even with the rain, as I've been at in a few years. And the storylines were part of it. The defending state champions, that's always fun to cover. And then, a team that's trying to gain some traction in Fredericktown that just kept fighting. And we learned pretty early on, Jake, that Fredericktown was going to have enough to challenge Central at the line of scrimmage. Then we learned later in the game that Fredericktown was going to have the athletes to make some big plays. And then as it just went on, the second overtime rolls around and essentially Central kind of wills their way to victory in that one. But to me, that's kind of a microcosm of what I'm seeing in the first half of the season. I think the bottom of our area is better than it has been, and I think the top maybe not quite as good as it has been. I see a lot more parity this year, guys. And you can kind of see it with the Frederick-Towns playing Central, St. Vincent beating Valley, and then the very next week, St. Vincent's down 19-0 to Perryville, who has kind of struggled to have a great season. And St. Vincent went on to win that game. But, Potosi starts out the season with a win out of area against St. Clair. So I kind of like the parity. I don't know for sure what's going to happen week to week. It's kind of a best guess scenario.
Well, I think you said it best. This is a season where the ceiling isn't set as high as what it was last year. Some of the teams around here had such a high ceiling to reach for that the floor was, that much further down, where it seems like that sandwich effect is kicking in with all the teams this year.
And, Jake, I'm glad you brought up the way that you said it. Just because we say that the ceiling's not as high as it was, part of that's because of where it was. There's still good teams. We still see good teams. We don't have, at this juncture, from what we've seen, and we haven't seen every team in the area, we haven't seen yet the elite, high-level, off-the-charts team, and we saw that, Central won a state championship, so obviously we saw it last year. But I do believe that the floor, as you guys were talking about, is certainly higher than it was. And that makes for fun weeks every week, because you really don't always know what's going to happen, because nobody thought, going back to the game that you were talking about, Chad, nobody thought we're going to go to Fredericktown and watch them go toe-to-toe with Central for 3 overtimes. Nobody thought that was possible, and with those scenarios we just discussed, that's why they're happening.
We saw a one-score game for much of the second half, Farmington and Jackson. Jackson has run away with that series for most of the last about decade and a half. Hillsborough lost some tremendous talent but yet they're still kind of, trying to hang on and fight to stay on top of that thing. But then Festus beats them by a touchdown. I think Festus might have a little bit better defense maybe than we've seen in past years, and maybe enough offense as they stay undefeated. So I kind of agree with you, Mike, that I think it does make it maybe a little bit more fun week to week.
Well, that floor you guys are kind of talking about, that the teams that have been kind of on that floor, you look at the records of the 10 teams in the MAFC and the other two kind of area teams that we sort of focus on in Farmington and Perryville, nobody's sitting with just one win. Nobody's winless. Right. And the ones that you sort of historically have really struggled, Fredericktown, Windsor, DeSoto, those would be the three I would kind of pick. They've all got 2 wins or more, and Windsor started out the season really rock solid with a couple of wins in 3 of their first 4 weeks. They were sitting 3-1 at one point. So these teams that, to Jake's point, that the floor it's kind of a moving bar, right? They're always moving the goalposts, so to speak. Those teams in the bottom have really come up, and there's, like you said, not one runaway team. Festus is the only undefeated team, 5-0. I mean, Central's going to have a good schedule. Valley Catholic's going to have a good schedule, but Festus is kind of the lone dog sitting 5-0, and everybody else is just kind of right there in a big pack.
Had a chance to see DeSoto against North County, and well, yeah, you guys were there too. Mm-hmm. And North County took care of business that night, but we saw some playmakers that DeSoto had that we haven't seen maybe in a few years. They took it over the top a few times. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, maybe DeSoto has a few guys now, maybe make a few explosive plays. I know Rush Schmidt feels a lot better about their offseason. He feels better about the weight room stuff, the nuts and bolts of a team. So, he's going to build it that way with some power football, but they've got some explosive guys up there too.
Well, I think that's the most important thing to say is you talked about the Fredericktown Central game, DJ Baca, Derek Irby being able to stretch the field, which is something that hasn't happened in the past few years. The Drummond kid from DeSoto being able to get behind North County secondary. It does make you as a coaching staff, though, sit down and actually game plan for these teams that we keep saying the floor is coming up. There's no undefeated team in the MAFC sitting right now where you're trying to catch and chase. So that's probably the biggest thing to see is the improvements that these underdog teams are having and to see the growth that their coaches are making.
And I'm glad, Chad, that you brought up the defense from Festus because Greg, you and I had a chance last year to see Festus on a number of occasions.
Yeah, we saw him a lot.
We noted very early in the season, this defense is pretty darn good, and a lot of those guys all returned, and now that's probably the reason that they're rolling along the way that they are. They do have some quality players on offense. I remember some of those that returned, but, man, if you can defend in this sport, makes a world of difference if you can get out there, hold teams in check, and you don't have to score 30 or 40 every night. I think Festus is a legit threat. I really do, and I'm probably a little biased by how much we got to look at him last year.
We're kind of hopping around a little bit, but Festus, you look at their opponents and who they've played, they've held 3 to single digits, and they've got 2 other blowout wins. The closest win was by 20. Matt, that's a pretty good slate midway through the season, sitting 5 games in. My question to you guys with that Fredericktown team, and you talked about the talent, Chad, that Fredericktown's got, I guess part of this is spending 22 years in the area and hearing all these coaches come through a number of these spots, like a Fredericktown, like a DeSoto. I'm going to be the guy to turn it around, right? I mean, you and I, Chad, Mike, have heard that from before. And
Jake Whitener.
One of those guys is sitting at the end of the table, by the way.
Right.
But did you get a sense that it was legit? Like, if you look at Fredericktown, they're 2-3. The wins have come over a winless Herculaneum bunch, and they beat a 12-0 Potosi team that right now is 2-3. Granted, they took Central, the defending state champs, to double overtime, different Central team, and then the loss to Valley Catholic and a loss to a 4-1 Perryville group.
Well, it just didn't feel fluky. That's the thing, is that they didn't stay in that game because of 3 muffs, and a couple of picks, and what they stayed in it because, like we talked about, they were tough up front to begin with, showed the athletes that could make big plays, and by the way, missed a 48-yard field goal in the driving rain by maybe 3 feet that would have won the thing in regulation. So all 3 phases, they're doing some good things there. I just didn't feel fluky. It felt like this is a team with some bona fide improvement to it.
And Jake, one thing I love about what you're able to do, because I sensed it that night you were watching them, you see more than just the score on the board, and you see the development and some of the things that's trying to get done with the program. How good a job is Steve Williams doing there?
Hands down. I mean, he has turned that program around. I would like to say I had a part in it, but I'm not taking that. It's all Steve. You have to lay that foundation. Steve has done a great job with it. And you look at the improvements, being able to play multiple different players as starters. You get in a program like that struggled, you may only find 12 dudes that you want to base your hat on. How many times being a 2-3 team, so you have 2 linemen, a center, and a starting right guard that are 160 pounds or less, and be able to go toe-to-toe with Central. And, you even go back to week 1 against Perryville. If they played the same mentality they played against Perryville, Perryville's not 4-1, and neither is Fredericktown 2-3. And you look at the grit that they had, the confidence, the poise. The only thing that hurt them, obviously, the weather, trying to kick that field goal. But then you also look at the fact that they ran the inside post route how many times and were successful. Jackson Jones had enough because that kid was dead at the end of that game. He'd had enough of playing football that night and intercepted that last pass. Steve Williams has done a phenomenal job turning that thing around in just 2 seasons.
Well, and Chad, like you're talking about, one of the biggest things, and we heard this for years, the Chuck Ford days, going back to that, they just got beat up front. And if they're doing things now that they can hang up front, that changes everything else that's going on the field around it. I mean, we all, the 4 of us, know it all kind of starts up front in high school football, and if you get manhandled on the line, it's going to be a long night. And we've seen that many a year from Fredericktown. So I'm happy to hear you say, because I wasn't physically at that game. I had to watch it, as you guys called it, and Mike endured the rain down on the field. But it's nice to hear that Fredericktown may be getting things trending in the right direction on the line.
You gave me a couple of jumping off points. I wanted to mention this because we're talking about Fredericktown. A tip of the cap to Kent Gibbs. He just earned his 200th win. And by the way, he went in the Hall of Fame 20 years ago. He had 119 wins then. So after the Hall of Fame, he's had 81 more wins so far. He's down at Cape now, but long time Fredericktown guy, Sykeston. And to tell you the truth, you won't meet a better gentleman in the game of football than Kent Gibbs. He always had a nice word about the other team. A very respectful guy, and so good job by Kent right there. And then something that you said, Greg, there is building from the trenches. I wanted to talk a little bit about North County because I think they're one of the more improved teams in our area this year. North County was close last year, but they were a little bit young. They returned their linemen, and they lose a quarterback to transfer. What are you going to do? Well, let's bring in a sophomore who feels like a good athlete, and they've got a couple of kind of quick guys that run the ball for them. They have a couple of guys that run hard, but the consistency with them is in the lines, and Brian Jones didn't change a thing. Like he said, no, we're going to play power football. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. And I was very impressed with them week 1, and I'll just be honest. I thought Farmington was going to win that game. I did. I thought they were probably going to be the better team, and North County was clearly the better team in that matchup. Then they went on to win on the road at Rolla, which was a nice win. They played good against a team from Illinois that was a tough team. They were up in the 4th quarter. I think they got Farmington at the right time. I think Farmington's improving too, but I think nice job by Brian Jones. To me, North County is a much improved team.
Well, sticking with that, up front and where football games are won and lost, to be honest with you, we talked about it for years. Brian Jones knew coming in that's going to be our strength. Mm-hmm. And he told us that early in the year, so we kind of knew what that was going to be. But I know Eric Kruppe is starting to be really pleased with his guys up front, and that wasn't an absolute known commodity going in. And after I talked to him after the rain-soaked Sykeston game this past week, and his basic comment, paraphrasing, was that was kind of our young, we didn't know for sure. Well, they're starting to know for sure because that game, they didn't put the ball in the air with the weather condition being what they were. And how big is that you can just say, we can run and we can still beat you 45-6 and we don't have to use any other part of our game. Your guys up front got to get the job done to do that.
They've got 3 guys that average between 80 and 98 yards rushing a game. Yep. And that means the line's getting it done. And it also talks about the fact that they're hitting on all 3 phases of their option. Now you've got McLean up the middle. You've got Dry, the quarterback, who takes it on that second level. And they've found their home run hitter in McCarthy. When he gets to the edge, you can't catch him anymore.
Well, I also think that gives you another versatile option, though, is you have your 3 phases, but you have to remember there's always that extra wing in the game. So when you start overplaying play side against a triple option team, you've always got to sink in the back of your head as a defensive coordinator. There's 4 guys that can touch the ball on this if we're not throwing it. And you have that other guy in your counter game of Connor Rice, who has been a pretty good athlete for them over the years. But now as you start to see McLean find his running room up the middle again, because we've had some weeks where, and I'll even date it back to past seasons, he comes in as a phenomenal freshman, outstanding sophomore, and then last year kind of dwindled a little bit with Brett Dry taking a lot of the reps. And then you also look at the fact that Brett Dry's out with injury, so Tatum Tinsley comes in. there's really a four-headed monster there, and Connor Rice is kind of a hidden gem. But I really think they've found their game again, as you said, in sophomore Josh McCarthy. I mean, to see a sophomore be able to turn a corner on a very quick Sikeston team, I know the turf was wet, but to see him to be able to take the pitch 7 yards back, still find the corner on offside tackle, I mean, I think you're right. I think Farmington's starting to find their groove here.
Jake Whitener, Chad Speakar, Mike Reeves, and yours truly, Greg Allen, bringing you the Midseason Roundtable, Knuckleball Prime Time live from the barn. Farmington sitting 3-2 with wins over St. Clair, Poplar Bluff, and Sikeston. The losses have come to North County in the opener, and then Jackson. And I know that, Chad, you were down in the field sideline for us that night that they played at Jackson, and I was pleased to hear that Eric Krupe was so positive afterwards, because I know Mike and I were really wondering where that conversation was going to go. Like you said earlier, that was a toggle between 1 to 2 score game all the way through that fourth quarter. They just couldn't get that sort of extra possession, which is why they tried the onside kick. But I think the way they competed at a place nobody does well, right, at Jackson. I think Farmington is set up to really have a great second half run, sitting 3-2 right now.
There was more positive to take out of it. And I think Eric Krupe saw that. They just couldn't get a stop, right, in that ball game. But how'd they respond? Well, they took care of business the next week against the Sikeston team they should have taken care of business against. But as Mike said, I don't think they attempted a single passing play. So they just went ahead and flattened their opponent that night, which is what they should have done. And they do kind of, Jake, like Jake said, they do appear to be a team gaining traction and maybe getting on a little roll here. We'll see.
Well, I think it comes with a little bit of confidence. You've got some young guys stepping up. You've got some new offensive linemen in that spot. But going back to you guys being, number one, playing in the pit at Jackson, that's not easy for anybody. And you finally settle your wits about you as a team, and you don't have a 3-score deficit that you're trying to climb out of. I mean, you may finally, for the first decade, come out ahead of Jackson in that situation. I mean, it was the same thing with Fredericktown against Central. You got your confidence about you because you hung with the team that you weren't supposed to hang with. So that it gives you that little bit of foundational stepping stones to know we are where we need to be, and we just got to push through and endure.
And we've been talking a lot about Farmington. One more comment. Eric Krupe, quick to point out post-game after the Sikeston game, like, we can throw the ball. We just didn't tonight because of conditions, and we didn't need to. We had a runaway win. I think he wants to make sure it's well known. We got confidence. Quarterback can put it in the air when we need to do it. It wasn't necessary tonight. Guys,
the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half of Jackson, I thought, demonstrated that as much as anything.
Well, I know we've been sitting here, Greg, Chad, Jake, and I know some of our Park Hills contingent is probably going, we won a state championship last year, and these guys can't even talk about us.
We're covering them this week.
We're getting there. We're gonna see them this week. But let's be honest. I don't know. There's a couple of things I'm wondering about Central. One, Corey Schweiss is going to tell everybody, guys, this isn't the state championship team. This is a different team. However, they found a way to win 4 of their 5 football games. So how much do you put stock in? Hey, it may not be the same team, but here they go winning a lot of football games again.
Owensville, Jefferson, Fredericktown, and St. Jen, and they only lost 38-7 to a St. Dominic team that I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about. Potosi in week 6, that's the game you might be watching this pregame for that one. Courtesy of the Parkland Sports live in conjunction with the Parkland podcast. I know Chad will have the call of that one, but I listened to your guys' call with the Fredericktown game, and my one worry is, are they going to get Jackson Jones killed? Because, I mean, he was the team that night. 811 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, 6 picks on the season, but 622 yards rushing, 11 touchdowns. The other guy, Karis Foster, 4 touchdowns on the ground with 367 yards. There's just, statistically speaking, that's it for Central. There's not multiple sort of people. And I know that Fredericktown game, it was just Jackson Jones. And if it's not Jackson Jones, it's Jackson Jones. But like you said, Mike, they found a way to win games, and that's what it matters. That's what it comes down to.
And one other thing to add related to Jackson Jones is you gave the numbers there, but he never leaves the field either because he's having to be one of the better defenders as well. And I do know, being on the sideline for the game that night, there were times that you could, helmet comes off for the rare time he comes to the sideline, and you can see that, whoa, I mean, he's given all he's got. He got frustrated on a couple of occasions because that game wasn't going the way they wanted it to for a little while. But a competitor, let's just say that's a good way to describe him. But there are some good reasons, Greg, to be concerned that, I know last year's always going to be in our minds, but they could go, it felt like 100 different directions last year, and everybody was skilled and could
Right.
get the job done. They don't have that kind of threat this year.
But I think what they do have is they have one of the coaches in the area, to me, that excels at putting his talent in the best position to win. And he, like you said, he knows he doesn't have the guys from last year, and so they can't do it the same way. He's got some young guys like Gage Toomey, August Black, who are really good athletes, but might not be ready for that load yet. By the end of the year, maybe they will be ready for some more. So Jackson does kind of have to drag them along a little bit, maybe while some of the other guys maybe get ready a little bit. And not only does he get tired because he plays all the time, he's played 5 overtimes already too. So that's a heavy load. But I think Central's kind of shown the heart of a champion though, because they've been in tough spots, and you get down to the second and the third, and they win. And that is
Right.
kind of the bottom line on that.
Well, I think just coming from the coaching side of what I foresee this week, you have a Potosi team that's down due to injuries. They start the season winning 2. They've lost the last 3. They endured an injury that took out part of their run game. Jackson's probably in a situation this week, if I had to guess. I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Coach Schweiss. Never will do that. Much more intelligent man than I. But this is also a week where Jackson maybe gets a little bit more healthy. Hopefully early in the game, you can have an opportunity to maybe release a little pressure on him, get some other dudes in the game. If it foregoes the way that it maybe could go by stats and rosters right now. But then you also look at something, the added pressure of Jackson. We're watching the Jefferson Central game early this season, and you see Corey Schweiss's son go out with injury, who was a big, dominant player to help them both corner and offensively. So, I mean, you're getting to that midpoint of the season, which I know is a big part of why we come together and talk about this, but your roster depth changes everything now. Moving forward over these next 4 games to set you up for Game 5 down the road now.
I talked to a coach today from Potosi, and they are injured, and their best player, he said, is a game time. Noah Walton. They really rely on him a lot, and so we don't know about him. He said he knows 2 things about his team right now: they're young and they're injured. Yeah. And so I think he likes the effort, and I think he likes the talent. Their quarterback, David Miller, is a freshman, and he went on and on about the talent of David Miller and what he can do. But he did always kind of come back. He's a freshman. When you have a freshman at quarterback, you're going to kind of inevitably have those growing pains.
And as we talk about Park Hills and Central, one thing that jumped out to me 2 weeks ago, I looked at it and I wanted to see how it played out. I guess they're not in a district that scares you to death either. That kind of might make a little bit of difference. You've got an undefeated Dexter team in that district, but everybody else that's in that district, I was taking a look at it earlier, but St. John, Fredericktown, Potosi, Herculaneum, Kennett, there's nobody on there that Central's going to go into a game thinking, probably not going to go our way. Don't know much about Dexter other than the record. I know in recent years, Central's had their way with Dexter, but totally different teams. I know that can be the case. But we do have teams that we see a lot of, that their districts, they've got teams in there that they can look, if they be honest, and go, we're in trouble. That team X, team Y, that's going to cause us some issues when we get to district time.
Well,
and I look no further than
Farmington's got that, right?
Farmington's got it. Cardinal Ritter is in their district. Monster. I don't know. Anybody knows about Cardinal Ritter sitting around, not in our table in our group here that's watching. They're off the charts. They're considered a nationally ranked type team.
That game they played in New Orleans, they went down and won.
Okay, yeah. They're traveling to New Orleans to play a regular season game. If you're Farmington, you've got to be a little realistic and go, chances of winning a district this year are not very high. And we've seen this happen before. We've seen basketball a lot over the years. Fredericktown dealt with it basketball for a ton of years, where they'd get the schedule and they'd get their district and they'd go, we're going to Sykeston. Yep. That's who our district is. Mm-hmm. So sometimes your district layout makes a lot of difference, because Farmington's got the talent to compete in a lot of districts, but probably not the one that they're in this year as far as the top team goes. So I like looking at that and thinking with Central's perspective, if they can be healthy and playing pretty well come district time, they're going to feel like they have every right to be a district champ. And if you do that, who knows what you do after that?
We'll talk more about that coming up in the second half of our segment. Central does get a matchup in Week 8 at Dexter, that district leading team. And other than that, Mike, they've already beaten the 2 teams right behind them in St. John and Fredericktown. You're talking about young quarterbacks and a freshman at Potosi. We'll wrap up this first half, guys, with I was super impressed both times I've seen him with North County's Brady McClure. You talk about turning the reins over to a sophomore. He was silky smooth and unrattled in the Farmington game, which is game 1, right? And then a couple of weeks later when they played DeSoto and win 42-14, I didn't think there was anything that fazed him. And you're talking about good running games. Aaron Cook is a beast. You put him and Noah Lashley back there and just turn around. I mean, Aaron Cook's kind of that Peyton Hillis kind of guy, the bruising kind of running back. That's a good little mixture that I think North County's got going. I'm anxious to see what they do in the second half because I think they got some pieces.
I like their makeup. I mean, they don't have thunder and lightning. They've got double thunder and lightning, right? Because you mentioned it with Cook and Lashley, you've got your power game, and then you pair McClure with then Whitfield, because Whitfield also has a little wiggle to him and a little burst. And so they've got a lot of different ways to go there. And really a nice situation for McClure. You bring him in with an experienced offensive line. Take care of this guy for me, right?
Yeah.
And let's get him off on the right foot. And that's exactly what they did.
I think that also helps you having that heavy run game that we continue to see week after week that Brian Jones implements. And he's using his strengths. He uses the strengths at the running back game, his offensive line. But then what that does from a coaching standpoint is it takes pressure off your quarterback when teams continuously see you handing it off. It's like a Farmington mindset. You know, you want to take pressure off Brett Dry, hand the ball to McLean. Hand the ball to McLean. Give it to McCarthy. Dry has time to throw because they're anticipating run. It's the same thing with McClure. As the season goes on, you see these teams playing on run, where he's got a simple play-action rollout, tied in off the end. I mean, he's done a great job, and you're right. McClure doesn't look like a sophomore with his voice. He looks like he's been
a veteran guy.
A veteran guy who's been in the system, maybe as a second-year junior, who's been in the system and understands what Coach Jones is trying to accomplish.
Would you guys agree that a lot of times, too, right now, at this point for him, and this is not a negative comment, and some people take it the wrong way, I think he's a really good game manager. Just if you need a play, he can make one, but he doesn't make mistakes. And as a quarterback sometimes, that's the most valuable thing you can do. I was just listening to a Caleb Williams press conference today playing in Chicago, and one of the things he said is, if I just take care of the ball, that's 90% of what I have to do here. I got to take care of the ball. He said, I got to quit throwing interceptions and fumbling. And I thought, for some quarterbacks at the high school level, if you're a good game manager, making plays can almost become a bonus. And he does make plays, no doubt about it. But I like him as a manager when I've seen him in person.
It is our midseason high school football roundtable. Need to spruce up your yard? Reynolds Landscaping and Lawn Care has you covered. Whether it's mowing your lawn, landscaping, installing paving stones, or creating beautiful raised beds for your home, Shane Reynolds and his team has it all handled. From yard drains and cleanups to berms, edgers, and custom paver patios, they've got the expertise to transform your outdoor space. Get a quote today. Shane Reynolds at 573-516-2387 for all your lawn and landscaping needs. 516-2387, a proud supporter of local high school sports at Reynolds Landscaping and Lawn Care. More coming up. Knuckleball Prime Time live from the barn with our high school football midseason roundtable. Second half of our midseason roundtable on Knuckleball Primetime live from the barn. Might be watching this for high school week 6 coverage, getting ready for Potosi and Central from Park Hills. Great to have you with us on Parkland Sports Live in conjunction with the Parkland Podcast. We'll kind of wrap up the first half of the season. Anything surprise you? We haven't talked a lot about teams like Windsor, Perryville, Hillsboro's kind of back to earth at 2-3. Valley Catholic's just doing Valley Catholic things. And St. John at 3-2. We haven't hit on those teams a lot. Anything jump out in that kind of that group to the panel?
I think Hillsboro, Greg, I think they're continuing to challenge themselves because they're still playing a schedule.
They are. It's nuts.
That as if they still have Division I middle linebackers, and they have good players.
Yeah.
But their huge run of lots of really great players, that might have been moving on a little bit, but that might help them later in the season because Hillsborough is always a good, hardworking ball club.
Well,
that
the
has a
schedule
few
doesn't get any
athletes.
easier.
Right.
I mean, it started with MICDS
That's
and
the
SLU,
deal.
and they wrap with Chaminade and Poplar Bluff.
See, and that's my point. They might be better than their record, and that might help them come postseason time. Because as Mike was talking about, you take a look at the districts. Some of the districts scare you at the top, some don't. But Festus, Perryville, Hillsborough, North County, Sykeston, DeSoto, Windsor, Hillsborough looks at that thing and says, we can play with anybody and beat anybody. They hung with Festus the first time they played him. So, I think for Hillsborough, I think their best might be yet to come.
And I think they played well enough against Festus from all the reports that I heard that there's no, if they meet them in a district setup, it's not going to be, we lost to them. No, they were right there. So again, we talk about what district are you in? I think for Hillsborough, they can sit 2-3 and still feel like we can make that run at that. And I think that you can say that for a lot of the teams, but, do you guys find it as interesting as I do that and I do it all the time, you kind of did it in your intro, Valley being Valley, they have great records, they do what they do, and we just sit and yawn until state playoff time because we know they're going to have a great regular season, and it's just, what are they going to do once they get to district time? What a great setup that must be for Judd Nager and his group, that you're that good. I know there's some pressure that comes with it, but that's pretty cool to say. We're so good that everybody just waits to see, can we win the state championship or advance deep? But they're doing Valley things again this year.
Their response to their only loss. I think St. Vincent's a good ball club.
I do too.
Their response, like Valley's like, okay, we lost. Now look at what they did. Now they're rolling in the 60s.
Right.
I mean, they obviously that got their attention. And
Kicking the bear, whatever, waking up the bear. Yeah,
I mean,
that may have happened.
The bear, whatever. How about this for parity, guys? I was thinking about this. North County beats Farmington. Then North County gets beat by Hillsborough. Then Festus beats Hillsborough. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying it could happen. I think the Festus-Farmington matchup later in the year is going to be a really good matchup. Wouldn't be shocked if Farmington won that game, in which case you'd have all those teams just beating each other in a round robin. And to me, I was kind of thinking about the case for parity around the area and kind of looking forward to the second half of the season. If Farmington is able to beat Festus, you'd have all those teams just beating each other the whole way around.
And not to skip on that, I want to hit on what both of you just said. So back to Hillsborough. Hillsborough has stacked the schedule. They had about a 4-year run of just top-tier names in the local area. But you have to think from the perspective of, if you're playing teams that are down underneath your skill level and you're trying to make that district run with these teams that are in your district, you don't have that confidence going in saying we can beat anybody in our district. So when you start stacking MICDS, SLU, Chaminade in your schedule, and you may be taking one on the chin, how good are you mentally preparing yourself knowing that as you get into district play, those district teams can't compete with your competition in regular season. Go back to Todd Vaughn. Todd Vaughn did the exact same thing with the SEMO North. He was tired of playing the MAFC teams. Let's go to the SEMO North. Let's play Jackson at the pit. Let's see what we're truly made of to start making some playoff runs. And on the flip side, Mike, whenever you're Coach Nager and you have the opportunity to know confidence, we took one on the chin in week 2, but we know we're going to rebound. It's not this is not the same team. We don't have this last name. We don't have this last name. Yeah, you do, because they all recycle themselves at Valley. But at the same point, you have the confidence in your staff. You have the confidence in your players to know we're going to make a playoff run. We're going to make a conference run. We are who we are, and you've got to compete with Big Blue.
And I think it's really interesting to go back to Hillsborough, but there's so many things that just come into your head while you're sitting here. They are 2-3. All 3 losses are by touchdown.
I was just going to say, that tough schedule you're talking about, Jake, it's not that they got creamed.
No,
I mean,
by no
21-14, 24-17. I mean, tight games against SLU and MICDS.
And go back to the MICDS week 1 that we all shared posts on. That game was in the third quarter, a minute left. Hillsborough has the ball and it gets called for weather. Never even finished a game against MICDS. So you don't know the actual outcome. They could be sitting on the other side of below 500 or losing record right now. We don't know how that game was going to end. Imagine the boost you have coming back. You beat MICDS week 1. What's your schedule going from there?
So I think what you'd be saying, Jake, as a coach as well, 2 and 3 playing really competitive, tough games against really good people, though the communities don't always see it, and maybe your players have to fight to understand it, is a heck of a lot better than 5-0 with 5 straight, 5 touchdown
That's the most
marches.
important thing, what you just said. Does the mindset, is it understood? You've just lost 3 really good games by less than a touchdown. It's not blowouts. Do your players actually understand the competitive nature that you've put them in to be successful come week 9 and week 10?
And that Festus game at 14-7, I think I misspoke earlier. I said Festus' closest game was by 20. Clearly, that's not the case. They won by 7 last week. Did anybody see what happened in that game? I'll be honest, I did not. In a 14-7 Festus win or 14-7 Festus win over Hillsborough, because that's the one kind of outlier for what Festus and what they've done this year, because everything else has been 50, 60, 34, and 20, and then they get 14 and win by a touchdown.
Well, look, I'm going to look at Hillsborough's numbers against these really good teams, and
Well, that's true, too. Nobody's scoring.
None of those elite teams went off on them. They got in the 20s, all right. They didn't go off on them, and those teams, believe me, they put up 50 regularly against subpar competition. So I'm going to look at it that Hillsborough probably defensively was really good.
And we were talking earlier about how good Festus's defense was
so you
earlier.
get a 14-7 game. I don't think that's odd at all. I really don't, given if you just we haven't seen either team in person, but it's pretty easy to compare stats and look at who's played who. And I think that game being the score that it was shouldn't surprise a lot of people.
Moving forward, Potosi and Central in week number 6. We got Windsor and North County in week 7. We'll see the Raiders again in week 8 with St. Clair coming to town. Wrap it up with what I think is always a good one, Farmington Central. I'm with you, Chad, on that Festus Farmington game in week 8. I think that's going to be and I've talked to Mike for years about this. That's the kind of game I like because, let's be honest, in the long run, there's nothing on the line, right? Okay, maybe a few points in a district seed. Nobody goes home after that game and their season ends.
But it's fun. The communities love it.
And it tells a lot about both clubs, I think.
Players know each other.
We love it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to broadcast, yeah. I think that's a fun one coming up, Greg, a little bit later on. If you're a Farmington fan, you're going to be scoreboard watching a little bit this week because you've got Jackson and Cape Central playing this week in the SEMO North, so you're not going to have a bearing a little bit on the SEMO North where Farmington resides. And then, as we are kind of talking about the second half of the season and what's coming up next week, you've got Valley and Central. Mm-hmm. And so you never know how that one's going to go. Valley's won the last couple regular season meetings. Central wins the district championship, not this last year, but the year before. So, and then just the storylines, with 2 great programs. In the last 12 years, looked up, Corey Schweiss is averaging 10 wins. Averaging. So that's a full regular season and a playoff game. He's averaging 10 wins over the last 12 seasons. So, he's got that program. It might not be quite to Valley's level where they, they're a threat to win state every year, but God, he's got that program in such good shape.
But I think you're comparing an apple and an orange whenever you're comparing what Valley was in until the championship factor was introduced. And then you have Central, who was always competing with a different level of caliber of teams. And not taking anything away from that program on either end. It is what it is, championship factor. A lot of people have their own opinion on it. But you're correct in the mindset of you get into that bragging rights game pretty much week 9. You don't know how Farmington's going to come off the Festus game. I agree. I think they could edge out Festus this year. I think they've hit their midseason stride to understand it. But on the same token, you get to see, no discredit to any coach in the local area. Judd's a very smart offensive guy, we know that, but when you look at the matchup here, Corey Schweiss is used to be a defensive guy back when he started his career, flips the board, goes over to the offense. You have a very strong offensive-minded coach versus Eric Krupe, who's a very strong defensive-minded coach. So just to see, if you love the game of football, to see the X's and O's, the chess match, you have to get a little excited for that, 7-mile drive to compete against each other.
Central coming up, Potosi, Valley Catholic, Dexter, and Farmington to wrap the regular season. Farmington's got Union, Cape Central, Festus, and Central, and North County. How about the Raiders in week 6 here? At Festus, nice matchup there. Then they'll finish after that, Windsor, St. Clair, and Sullivan. I like the Raiders. That's kind of a statement game, right? If Festus is the team that's rolling, let's see what we got.
And when I talked to Brian Jones early in the year, one of the things was he said, we don't have a week off this year. We don't have that game that every once in a while coaches know. If we play well, we're going to roll in that game as long as we don't make mistakes. And he said, I don't think we have that on the schedule this year. And looking at what they've already played, you see the scores, generally tight games that they played. And then you would think Festus would be a heck of a challenge.
Sure.
So there again, challenging yourself with your schedule. And I think North County's done that too to try to make them as viable as possible coming into the year.
If you want a home game for district time, that could be a big one for North County too. Festus at the top of Class 4 District 1, and North County's kind of right in the middle of that whole thing right now. So if they want a home game or really want to kind of move up in the standings in district right there, that could be a big one for them.
I'm just looking down the list. Festus, you talk about the Tigers sitting at 5-0 right now, kind of leading that North County district. The last team they're going to play here that has a chance to leapfrog them in the district standings, right? Because everybody else, DeSmet, Farmington, Jackson, those teams aren't in their district. So the last chance for somebody to say, hey, we own a head-to-head over the Festus Tigers comes this Friday with Brian Jones and the Raiders.
I think that's going to be a game that, for both coaches, I mean, you're going to find out really what your team's made of. You know, you're hitting the downhill slope side of second part of the season, and if you're Coach Jones, you're going to find out, can your offensive line hang with a team that's undefeated? What's the pressure on that sophomore quarterback going to do? How effective can your run game be? But if you're in the Festus Tigers, you know, you can't underestimate anybody in the second half of the season. You're sitting at 5-0, and you look at the scores, you know, going back to the Hillsboro question, everyone played in a monsoon in the local areas. You know, how much does that 14-7 indicate that it was that close of a game with Hillsboro? Or, as we said, you know, we didn't get to see it. How sloppy was the game? You know, did you have a lot to clean up coming out of week 5 into week 6?
It was probably sloppy. I stood in that monsoon, and it probably was sloppy because it was hard to play clean football that night.
Well, I think that game coming up at Festus is going to be a good test for what we talked about earlier and the North County line up front. Mike, you and I, as we talked earlier, we saw Festus a bunch last year. Yep. And the one thing that impressed me was the defensive pressure that they got on opposing quarterbacks. And I know years are different, but the system's the system. I mean, AJ Ofadale and company, that's kind of what they do, right? And so Brady McClure is going to have a challenge coming up on Friday to see how he can stack up, and his line can stack up against a Festus team that usually does a job to get after the quarterback.
And there's nothing Festus is doing this year that surprises either one of us based on the number of looks that we got at them a year ago. And I think it was week 2 last year that we both looked at each other and went, their defense is good.
Yeah.
The defense is really good. Well, they're carrying it right on over. And, yeah, they play a lot of tight games, and it's not always easy for them. They'll play some tight games down the stretch, I was thinking. But I think the fact they won the one tight game that they did have, that says something about them, too. I can't wait to see what North County's yardage numbers are against Festus, what the point total is against. I want to see those kinds of things because when you play the elite defenses, you do learn a lot about your offense when you do that.
Let's talk about districts. As we talked about the Central District earlier, Farmington's in that tough one. You got 2 undefeated. Then Cardinal Ritter, the absolute powerhouse at 5-0. Cape Central's 5-0. Farmington right now sits in 3rd. Nobody else of a coverage note in that district. That Class 4 District 1 thing with Festus at the top has Perryville sitting at the 2. How long has it been since Perryville's been a 2 in the district?
I was looking at my papers, and that was the team I was going to bring up.
Wow.
Just because Coach Roth had the years of struggle, you know, to get that program where it is. And you go through and you look at their wins and losses, the only loss they have was the St. Vincent, who, keep in mind, beat Valley. And this was a 29-25 game that they lost, that they were actually up early in, I believe 13-0 over St. Vincent. You know, you have to look and consider, man, could this be the year that they actually turn the corner, finish above 500, maybe do something into the playoffs this year? Coach Roth has done a good job. I mean, he's stuck with it. You know, he went through thick and thin down there to try to turn the corner. He's finally turned the corner. They have Jefferson this week, which is a game that I got to see Jefferson early this year. Didn't quite hit its stride watching them against Central. But at that point, Central still had a few more weapons, healthier weapons at the point. But at the same point, I mean, you can't go against what Coach Roth is doing to promote these Pirates.
Perryville's record is obviously very good, and their product on the field is good. What's going to hurt them is their schedule strength.
Correct.
If you don't know how postseason in Missouri works, it's all based on this mathematical formula. You gain
magical
points.
mathematical formula.
you gain points as you play games. If you beat this team, you get so many points based on not only your record but their record and their opponents and things like that. So Perryville's played some smaller class teams, and Hillsboro and North County. You've got Hillsboro at 2-3, North County at 3-2, Perryville at 4-1. But yet, if you take a look at the points, you've got North County only 4 points behind Perryville. So there's not a big margin for error for them in terms of holding that spot because of the strength of schedule factor. But that doesn't take away from what they've done on the field, though.
Not at all.
Fair enough to say, though, that Perryville right now, as we sit here, they don't have a win that the computers like. That's kind of the way I'd look at it.
Fredericktown, DeSoto, Bayless, and Grandview. Yeah. Grandview's 3-2. I know they got a winless Herculaneum team coming up in 8. And they got Cuba, traditionally not a power, and not much. We're not going to know much about Marquette Catholic in Illinois. But yeah, that's not a schedule that sits there and screams like, holy cow, look at this win.
Their most impressive to the eye is probably the loss.
Yeah.
To St. Vincent.
29-25.
Because they played it tight.
Yeah.
And St. Vincent's got the win over Valley.
I also think, and I'm gonna jump in from a coach that was on a losing program. Whenever you're trying to turn that corner and you can finish the season, you're looking at maybe out of the 4 games, like you said, we don't know anything about Marquette Catholic in Illinois. But if you win, say, 3 of these 4 last games, and you put yourself in a situation that even if you do drop in your district standings, I mean, it says something about a community and a school like that I know that we want to see the big, reflective outcomes of winning a conference, winning a district. But for a program that hasn't had a winning season or continues to try to build towards winning programs, it says something just to have a winning record at the end of the season.
So, Jake, let me ask you this. Are we saying, and I think it's okay, are we saying that the type of schedule you have and the way you go about it is completely dependent on what you have in your program at the time? Because we said a moment ago that you could have a program, Hillsboro, that's playing all these powers and getting beat. That's okay, no problem. It's an established program. They've done it before, whereas a Perryville is trying to get back on track.
Correct.
A Fredericktown, for example, or whatever. A winning record against whoever you get it against is going to be a positive. Is that a good way to view it?
I mean, because you look at what you're trying to build with your student athletes. Sometimes it takes a winning program to buy more kids into your program. If you're continuing to be a 1-9 program after the 10 week and you're losing in the first round of districts, how many kids want to continue to get beat up for 15 weeks of their life? Plus the off season. Sometimes it does. I mean, there's 2 perspectives. We come from a winning program. We're going to face the best to be, beaten by the best later in the season, or we've got to do something to maybe, respectfully speaking, lesser of opponents, cupcake the schedule just a little bit to wherever you can get some buy-in from the program, from the community, that we are starting to turn that corner. Mike, it's a double-edged sword. Which way do you want to be a victor? Do you want to be a victor later in the seasons in week 12 and 13, or do you want to take it in maybe week 10 or 11, get beat first, second round, but you have something to grow on for the future of your program?
Well, let's put this in perspective a little bit for Perryville's. They're sitting 4-1, and we're not sitting here knocking them. This is a team that's had 1 winning season since 1999. They went 6-4 in 2017. They've had 3 500 seasons. Blaine Boss in 19, Mike Wojcik in 15, and the other one was in 2006 under Rick Chastain. So this is not a program that is used to sitting 4-1 after 5 weeks, much less we're sitting here talking about, if they win 3 of their last 4, they're sitting, 7-2, like just 7 wins for Perryville's like off the charts, right?
Correct.
Now, districts is a different animal, but right now they sit at 2, and then you got some monsters kind of behind them with Hillsboro and North County teams that they think they've got a chance to make some noise. Sykeston, DeSoto, and Windsor after that. That Central District, is that thing just Dexter and Central, and everybody else is vying for just a spot in the semis?
You got Fredericktown that went to double overtime.
I'm waiting on what's to come out here.
All right, well, think about it, because you want to say that on paper, and then I go, Fredericktown took them to triple overtime, and St. John just took them to double overtime. So there's the 2 teams that you're right, but that are right below you.
Yep, those are the next 2. St. John 3, Fredericktown 4.
You got by the nose of a football against them. You barely found a way. Now, you found the way, but I find it hard to say that district's a 2-team race when the 3rd and 4th teams have played so well against Central. So I've got to say no to your question. It's not just those 2. I think that all those top 4 can easily at least say, we got a chance at this thing. So I would go that route.
Semifinals on in that district.
I think so too.
Some burns. Yeah.
Yep.
I agree with you. I think it's the top 4 teams as it's listed now. It depends on how Dexter finishes out. It depends on the health of Central. It depends on, we get to see Fredericktown and St. John match up. But at the same point, you can't necessarily say that it's going to be Dexter Central's matchup week is going to determine that. I truly think by point standing, there's a chance for that maybe to be one of the more interesting districts to watch this year.
And then that young Potosi team that's got a ton of injuries sitting at 5, winless Herculaneum and winless Kennett rounding out the pack. Valley Catholic's the top seed in their district. No surprise there. They're one of 3 4-1 clubs in that district. Caruthersville's 3rd, Scott City's 4, Portageville sits at a 2. East Prairie, New Madrid, and Kelly round out the pack. And honestly, guys, it's a lot of teams we don't spend a lot of time talking about.
A note, Greg, that Valley just came back from Caruthersville with a win this past week. So they're, not only are they sitting pretty, but, their matchups.
And beat them by 30.
Yeah.
So, that Portageville group, not one we're going to know a ton about.
None of the teams other than Caruthersville, and I've got some people that follow football in that part of our state. There's nobody other than Caruthersville that most people would say would have any even chance against Valley. And we saw what happened in the one matchup they had. You just mentioned it. So you would think Valley is a very strong favorite to win that district at the end of the season.
Knuckleball Prime Time live from the barn. Well, I know we enjoyed it. Craving some delicious pizza? Check out locally owned Fired Food Truck with Chris and Amber Dunlap, a local mobile pizzeria specializing in authentic Napoleon-style pizza, mouth-watering specialty cannolis. Plus, they're now serving up New York-style pizzas on select days. Don't miss out. Follow Fired on Facebook for daily and weekly specials and updates. Fired Food Truck, where pizza lovers get their fix. We enjoyed it earlier tonight. It is awesome. Proud supporters of local high school sports. I'm anxious to see how the second half of this thing goes. Chad, you kind of lead the way coming up on Friday for week 6 with Central. I know I've got the call on 7 and 8, and you're back in the house for 9, so it should be a lot of fun.
We've had a couple of long winning streaks that we've seen threatened anyway in our coverage so far this year. Central and Fredericktown, and then Farmington down at Jackson. We've got another one coming up this week as Central not only has won the last 6 against Potosi, they've won 14 of the last 15. So is this the week it can happen? I don't know. We'll see.
I just hope it happens in dry weather, whatever it happens. After last week, no more hurricanes, tropical storms. Let's just go through the rest of the year with dry weather. That'd be great.
You were talking about not wanting to be on the sidelines for rain, and it's happened like the last 3 weeks in a row.
It feels like every time. And the last one, that one was rough. And then they had the wind involved. But, hey, you got it out when you have to. But I would take just a nice, clear, calm night for the last 4 regular season weeks.
Looking forward to bringing you high school football on Parkland Sports Live in conjunction with the Parkland Podcast. Guys, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, Jake Whitener, Chad Speakar, Mike Reeves. I'm Greg Allen saying so long. Midseason High School Football Roundtable. You might be watching it for coverage of Week 6 with Potosi and Central. If you are, kickoff is just around the corner. Other than that, we say so long from Knuckleball Prime Time live from the barn.